As the last wisps of daylight fade from the sky, the year 1347 slowly comes into view, a time when the world was on the cusp of a great and terrible change, one that would leave an indelible mark on the course of human history. You would have heard the distant rumble of thunder, the soft lapping of waves against the shore, as the Black Seaport city of Kaffa, a bustling hub of trade and commerce, stood poised on the edge of a catastrophe. It was here, in this bustling metropolis, that the seeds of disaster were sown, as merchants and ships arrived from the east, bringing with them the unseen, the unheard, the uninvited guest that would soon spread its dark wings across the continent. I always come back to this one, the story of how the plague, born on the backs of fleas and the rats that hosted them, would slowly, inexorably creep its way into the very fabric of European life, leaving in its wake a trail of death, of sorrow, of unmitigated despair. The year 1347, a time of relative peace and prosperity, was drawing to a close. The harvests had been good, the weather fair, but in the ports of Genoa, of Venice, of Marseille, a different story was unfolding, one of mystery, of terror, of unexplained illness and sudden, inexplicable death. The plague, a disease that would soon become all too familiar, was slowly, quietly making its way into the heart of Europe, its presence marked by the swelling of lymph nodes, the appearance of black boils, the swift, merciless progression from health to sickness to death. As the winter of 1347 gave way to the spring of 1348, the true horror of the plague began to reveal itself. The rapid spread of the disease, the collapse of social norms, the desperate, futile attempts to stem the tide of death that was sweeping across the continent. A great, dark wave that would soon engulf all in its path, leaving behind a landscape forever changed, a world that would never be the same again. The plague, a disaster of unimaginable proportions, was now loose upon the world, its presence felt in every town, every village, every household, a constant, gnawing fear, a reminder that death was always close at hand, waiting to strike, waiting to claim its own. As the last wisps of sunlight faded from the horizon, in the year 1347, a sense of unease settled over the bustling ports of Europe. The sound of gentle lapping of waves against the ship's hulls and the murmur of hushed conversations among the sailors and merchants creating a somber melody that seemed to foreshadow the darkness that was to come. You would have heard the creaking of wooden ships, the smell of salt and tar, and the cries of seagulls wheeling overhead as the Genoese fleet, its vessels worn and weary from a long journey, sailed into the harbor of Messina, Sicily, bearing with it an unseen cargo that would soon change the course of history. I always come back to this moment, the intersection of trade and tragedy, as the seeds of devastation were sown, carried on the ships from the distant shores of the Black Sea, where the plague had already begun its relentless march. The year 1347 was a time of great upheaval, the social and economic fabric of Europe already strained by the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that had brought famine and hardship to many parts of the continent. And now, with the arrival of the plague, the very foundations of society seemed to be crumbling. As the ships docked and the sailors disembarked, they brought with them the disease, its presence marked by the swellings, the fevers, and the swift, merciless death that would soon become all too familiar, spreading rapidly throughout the city, carried by the fleas that infested the rats that scurried through the narrow streets. In the months that followed, the plague spread, carried by trade and travel, as merchants and pilgrims, unaware of the danger they posed, dispersed to all corners of the continent, leaving in their wake a trail of death and despair. The sound of mournful bells tolling in the distance, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had unfurled across the seas. The cities, with their crowded streets and unsanitary conditions, became breeding grounds for the disease, the stench of death and decay hanging heavy in the air. As the plague claimed its victims, rich and poor, young and old, with equal indifference. And as the darkness deepened, the very fabric of society began to fray, as fear and superstition took hold, and the rule of law gave way to chaos and anarchy, the world slipping into a descent of madness and despair. As the darkness gathers, the shadows cast by flickering torches dance upon the walls of medieval cities, where the year is 1347, and the air is heavy with an unsettling silence. You would have heard the distant hum of whispers, the soft murmurs of a population on edge, sensing the approach of something sinister, though they couldn't quite grasp what it was. The Black Death, as it would come to be known, was slowly making its way westward, leaving in its wake a trail of devastation that would shake the very foundations of European society. I always come back to this one, the way the pandemic seemed to seep into the consciousness of the people, like a chill that spreads through the bones on a cold winter's night. It began in the ports of Genoa, where merchant ships from infected areas of Central Asia had docked, carrying with them the fleas that would transmit the disease to the unsuspecting population. From there, it spread rapidly, fueled by the lack of understanding and the primitive medical practices of the time. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Paris were soon overwhelmed, their narrow streets and alleyways filled with the ashen crowds of the sick and the dying. The once vibrant markets and town squares were now empty, the only sound the mournful tolling of church bells, a somber reminder of the tragedy that was unfolding. As the months passed, the death toll mounted, and the social fabric of the cities began to fray. The rule of law gave way to chaos, and the usual customs and rituals of death were abandoned, as the sheer number of corpses made it impossible to bury them with the dignity and respect that was once afforded to the deceased. The streets were filled with the stench of rotting flesh, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the weight of grief and despair. And yet, even in the midst of such unimaginable horror, there were moments of tenderness, of compassion, of humanity that would shine like beacons in the darkness, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure. As the years passed, a sense of unease settled over Europe, like a slow-moving fog that clung to the skin and chilled to the bone. And it was in this atmosphere of growing fear that the Black Death began to spread its dark wings. It started in 1346, in the ports of Genoa, where merchant ships from the east had brought not only exotic spices and fine silks, but also the seeds of a terrible disease. You would have heard the whispers of a plague that was sweeping through the cities of Asia, a plague that was said to be so deadly, so merciless, that it left nothing but death and despair in its wake. I always come back to this one, the way the disease seemed to appear out of nowhere, like a ghostly presence that haunted the streets and the homes of the living. By 1347, the plague had spread to other parts of Italy, to the cities of Florence and Venice, where it cut down rich and poor alike, leaving no one untouched by its ravages. The streets were empty, the markets were still, and the only sound was the tolling of bells, a mournful sound that seemed to echo through the empty streets like a death knell. It was as if the very fabric of society was beginning to unravel, as the rules and customs that had governed life for so long began to break down in the face of such unimaginable horror. And then, in 1348, the plague jumped to France, to the port city of Marseille, where it spread quickly, like a fire that consumes everything in its path. As the plague spread, the social and economic structures of Europe began to crumble, like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. Trade and commerce ground to a halt, as cities were quarantined and entire regions were cordoned off in a desperate attempt to contain the disease. The once thriving cities of Europe were now empty, haunted places, where the only signs of life were the carts that rolled through the streets, collecting the bodies of the dead. It was a time of unimaginable suffering, a time when the very foundations of human existence seemed to be shaken to their core. And yet, even in the midst of such darkness, there is a strange, quiet beauty, a beauty that speaks to the enduring power of the human spirit, a spirit that can face even the darkest of times with courage and resilience. As we slowly make our way through the shadows of history, the darkness deepens, and the silence is only broken by the faint whispers of the past. The year is 1347, and the world is about to be forever changed by the arrival of the Black Death, a pandemic that would spread its dark wings across the globe, leaving death and despair in its wake. You would have heard the rumors, the faint murmurs of a plague that had been sweeping through Asia, leaving cities empty and fields barren. The plague had begun its journey in the east, in the cities of Central Asia, where the trade routes converged, and the sounds of merchants and travelers filled the air. From there, it spread to the west, carried by the fleas that infested the rats that scurried across the ships that sailed the Mediterranean. I always come back to this one, the way the plague seemed to move with a slow, relentless purpose, as if it were a dark and malevolent force that could not be stopped. As the years passed, the plague continued its relentless march across Europe, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. In 1348, it reached the shores of Italy, where the cities of Florence and Venice were hit particularly hard. The streets were empty, the houses were closed, and the only sound was the tolling of the bells, a somber and mournful sound that seemed to echo across the water. By 1349, the plague had spread to the rest of Europe, reaching as far as England and Scotland. The cities were devastated, the populations decimated, and the survivors were left to pick up the pieces and try to rebuild their shattered lives. It was a time of great sorrow and great change, a time when the old certainties were torn apart and the world was forever altered. And yet, even in the midst of such darkness, there is a strange and somber beauty, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward, always a glimmer of hope. As the years passed, a sense of unease settled over Europe, like a gentle mist that clings to the skin, refusing to lift. It started in the east, in the distant lands of China and India, where the plague had been a constant presence for centuries, its power and fury slowly making its way westward, carried by the trade routes that crisscrossed the continent. You would have heard rumors, whispers of a great sickness that swept through cities and towns, leaving death and destruction in its wake. The year was 1347, and the Black Death, as it would come to be known, was just beginning to make its presence felt in Europe. I always come back to this one, the way the plague seemed to emerge from the shadows, its origins shrouded in mystery, its power and ferocity unlike anything that had been seen before. It's said that the plague arrived in Europe via the port city of Genoa, where a fleet of ships from the Crimean city of Kaffa had docked, carrying with them the infected fleas that would spread the disease far and wide. From there, it spread rapidly, carried by the very people who were trying to escape its ravages, fleeing from city to city, town to town, in a desperate bid to outrun the darkness that was closing in around them. As the plague took hold, the social and economic fabric of Europe began to unravel, like a thread pulled from a tapestry, slowly at first, but with increasing speed and ferocity. The year 1348 was one of unrelenting horror, as the plague swept through France, England, and Spain, leaving in its wake a trail of death and despair that seemed to have no end. And yet, even in the midst of such chaos and destruction, there was a sense of inevitability, a feeling that this was a disaster that had been waiting to happen, a reckoning that had been a long time coming. The plague was an unseen enemy, a force of nature that seemed to be beyond human control, and its power was only just beginning to be felt. As the warmth of summer begins to fade, a sense of unease settles over the landscape, like a gentle mist that clings to the skin, refusing to lift. It's the year 1347, and the world is on the cusp of a great and terrible change, one that will leave deep scars and alter the course of history forever. You would have heard the rumors, whispers of a plague that's sweeping across the known world, leaving death and despair in its wake. I always come back to this one, the way the darkness crept in, slowly at first, like a summer shadow falling across the face of Innocence. In the ports of Genoa, ships arrive from the east, their holds filled with goods from the distant lands of Asia, but also, unbeknownst to the sailors and merchants, carrying a deadly cargo, the fleas and rats that will spread the disease far and wide. The first cases are reported in the summer of 1347 in the cities of Messina and Genoa, where the plague spreads quickly, fueled by the crowded and unsanitary conditions. As the months pass, the plague begins to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, carried by the trade routes and the rivers, a relentless march across the continent. The summer air is thick with the smell of death, as the plague claims its first victims, the poor and the weak, the old and the young, all equally susceptible to its ravages. The cities are filled with the sound of mourning, the wailing of the bereaved, the tolling of church bells, a somber and mournful melody that echoes through the streets. And yet, even as the plague spreads, there's a sense of disbelief, a feeling that this can't be happening, that the world is somehow immune to such horrors. But the plague is relentless, a force of nature that will not be denied. And as the summer wears on, the shadow falls, darkness deepening, and the world is forever changed. As the winter of 1348 slowly receded, the chill of death still lingered, a haunting presence that would not be shaken. You would have heard the sound of silence, a heavy stillness that fell over towns and villages, where the only movement was the faint rustling of black cloth, the somber garb of mourners. The plague, that great and terrible leveler, had brought humanity to its knees, and the world was a desolate, frozen landscape. I always come back to this one, the way the Black Death seemed to seep into every pore of society, a creeping darkness that would not be vanquished. In the spring of 1349, the thaw brought no respite, only a fresh wave of suffering, as the disease, now entrenched, continued its relentless march across Europe. The very fabric of life was beginning to unravel, threads of tradition and custom snapping like brittle twigs. Funeral processions, once solemn and dignified, became chaotic and improvised, as the sheer scale of the dead overwhelmed the living. The stench of decay hung in the air, a noxious miasma that clung to everything, a constant reminder of the horror that had been unleashed. As the seasons passed, the plague continued its grim work, scything through communities like a spectral reaper. The social bonds that had held societies together began to fray, and the rule of law gave way to chaos and desperation. And yet, even in the midst of such unrelenting darkness, there were moments of beauty, of dignity, of humanity. A priest tending to the dying, his face a mask of compassion and sorrow. A family huddled together, sharing what little they had, their love and devotion a beacon of hope in a world gone mad. The darkness deepens, the shadows lengthen, and the silence grows, a soft, enveloping blanket that wraps around us, holding us close. The Black Death, that terrible and mysterious visitor, has left its mark, a scar that will take centuries to heal. And as we drift, suspended in this sea of sorrow, we are reminded that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of light, a faint glow that beckons us forward into the unknown. The darkness slowly closes in, a gentle, soothing shroud, and we are lost once more in the stillness of the night.